Hello, everyone. How was the keynote today? Hope you guys are having an active Wednesday, and hope you guys have had time to cap launch. And now we are all excited. Like, I know you might be sleepy, but I hope now you can all be. I can gather some enthusiasm here to say, let's talk about engagement. And I hope you guys are as excited to talk about engagement as we are in talking to you about what we are doing with user engagement. I'm Georgie Matthews. I'm a product manager on the Pinpoint team.
I'm Ilan Sahayek, and I'm also a product manager on the Pinpoint team.
And what we want to talk about engagement, the way I wanted to start off this was, I want to talk to you about, I was coming into Vegas, and suddenly I was at the airport. I got a push notification, an SMS, and an email message saying my flight's delayed. And I was like, come on, that's not a good experience, right? I was like, why am I getting the same message on 3 channels? And I started talking to Ilan, and we said, how do we do this presentation? We started thinking about, why don't we talk about this as the different stakeholders who actually manage and influence engagement for customers. So as we run through this presentation, I will be the developer who's actually building these systems to drive user engagement. And Ilan?
I'm going to be the marketer, and I'm going to be the person who wants to be able to drive these engagements and then turn to Georgie, my developer, to get certain capabilities built in. Just a quick show of hands. Are there any marketers in the audience?
Awesome.
Awesome. We got a few. Great.
That's good. So,
sorry, real quick, just one more question. Any developers that work in marketing teams? Great.
Awesome.
Awesome.
So as we run through it, guys, I was told that to tell you guys, we will definitely have time for Q&A at the end. So Ilan, let me ask you this. To start off, as a marketing team, what are your aspirations?
Well, we want to make sure that we're as valuable to a user as possible. We want to communicate and engage with them when it's valuable to them, when we have something of value to them. We want to avoid spamming them, avoid over-communicating and becoming a nuisance. So it's all about being right, about when to have a conversation, what conversation to have with them, and on what channel to have that conversation. That is the core of what we're trying to do in marketing.
So in short, you want to avoid the scenario that happened with me?
Correct. I do not want to communicate over multiple channels with the same message at the wrong time.
All right. So what are the challenges of what is the scenario today?
So today, as a marketer, I've got multiple channels that I have to reach my users through. And then I have multiple different offerings that I'm using for each of those channels. And the challenge I have with that is that there isn't one consistent way or consistent view of the user. I don't know whether that user received a push notification and an email, and I don't know that I'm not over-communicating with that user. So the challenge is many disparate systems, they're not all integrated, and there isn't one consistent view of that user. And I also don't know the context of my user in that case, because I'm communicating with them through many different channels and through multiple different applications. So it's a disjointed user experience, and my goal is to bring that together and have one experience where I can communicate with them over multiple channels and know what they're doing across my organization.
So Ilan, if I were to summarize what you just said, effectively today, folks, there is no way to actually measure overall effectiveness of messaging across those channels because of the fact that you have those disparate systems. Because of the fact that you have these different systems of records, it becomes a challenge. And if you go a level deeper and say, what does it start? What are the symptoms for this, and how does it start off with? I think first would be, how do you start? There are multiple touch points. How do you start building a system that effectively engages customers across all of these touch points? And then if you go further, Ilan mentioned about user context. How do you then capture across the channels as well as across the applications that the users are engaging with you and touch points that are engaging with you? How do you capture that user context? How do you understand information about users? And as you think about being able to capture their attention across these touch points, it's about how you can be creative and how can you establish it in more a contextual way and be more real time with it. Go a level deeper, it becomes a lack of consistency on how you look at data. It is because you really don't have a 360-degree view of what are the inputs that is impacting user behavior, and how is actually each of these messaging channels impacting their engagement as you think about the 360-degree there. Then, so what are we going to talk to you guys about today? The first thing is we did definitely start about talking about user engagement and providing you an overview of how we think about digital user engagement. We want to give you an overview of Pinpoint. What are we doing with Amazon Pinpoint? What are the capabilities it has today? And last, we want to, given the context you have on the about you, we want to share how do you use Pinpoint to drive effective engagement. So we want to talk about the different components and how does the Pinpoint story fit into enabling you guys to build effective user digital engagement strategy. Ron?
So the first thing I need as a marketer, I need a one analytic system or one place where I'm capturing all the events and all the different things that my users are doing, whether they're using my applications, whether they're receiving my messages, whatever my users are doing, even talking to my call centers or interacting with devices, whatever my users are doing, I need to know everything about those users so that I can know what they're engaged with and what they don't like. Once I've got that, the next thing I need to do is to figure out the user context. So I need to have as many attributes as I can about what my users are doing and get as much context about where they are and what they're doing right now. So that's the second part that I need as a marketer. And then finally, I need the tools, once I have all that information, to be able to engage with them, to be able to interact with them, to be able to figure out which channels I should interact with them, and to be able to do it myself or within the marketing team so that it can be done in a very agile way. We don't want user engagement, and every time we want to fine-tune the user experience, to be a whole development process that's going to take another 3 months to turn around. We want to do it very fast and in an agile way so that we can improve very quickly.
So Lon, let me ask you this. What are your team's goals when you think about marketing and engagement as such?
Yeah. So the first thing we think about is the user experience. We want our users to get as much value from our brand. We want our users to have a very convenient experience. And when they do purchase something from us, we want them to get the most value that they can. So if we are promotion-driven, we want to make sure they get the best promotions when they're making a purchase and personalize that experience for them. So the first thing is the user experience has to be a very convenient one and very valuable one. The second thing is our objective is to drive user loyalty. We want the users to keep on coming back to us and to find it very convenient that when we go to them and we're giving them value on a consistent basis. So that's how we build the trust, and that's how we build loyalty from our users. And then finally, you know, as a marketer, I'm given a budget for how much I can spend to do all of this. So I want to make sure that when I'm spending my money, I'm being as effective as possible, that I can measure the results and improve very quickly so that I'm spending my money in the most effective way for my users and for my company.
Quick. So Ilan talked to you about the goals, right? Now, when we started thinking about Pinpoint, we said, how do we start building the system? How do we start building a framework for reference on building this platform out today and also as the platform evolves in the long run? We started thinking on, if you guys go from the left-hand side, who are the customers who will be using it? For us, the customers are, there's a bunch of business users who are the marketers, the customer support folks who will use the product from a business user context. Then there's developers who are using the product to actually fulfill requirements for the marketing teams and be able to build a scalable system quickly and in a fast manner. And then take it further from what are these business users using the product for to engage who? I think it's the end users, and they're trying to engage them through a journey for them across their life cycle, the end user life cycle of spreading awareness, acquisition, onboarding, and engagement. You want to think about all your messaging channels on as you build any system, and this is our reference, but as you think about building engagement systems for your platforms, think about that hey, what does that life cycle for each customer look like? From from the point of acquisition, generating brand awareness, to acquiring users to the brand, to onboarding them, how do you help use messaging to onboard that, and capture analytics on, as well as driving engagement. Now you've defined that, then we said, okay, what goes into the building blocks here? At the fundamental level is analytics. I think we, as a team, fundamentally believe it has to be predicated across analytics as the horizontal layer, where you have to have context, and the context for the user, the understanding for enriching campaigns on an ongoing basis is driven by that user analytics platform. Once you have that, on the engagement management solutions, you have the tools which will enable you, a business user, the developer, to actually create cohesive scenarios, create rich scenarios to engage their users. And then those scenarios are driven by context that is driven by the user management service about the user. The context about their behavior, the context about their preferences, context about how they've used and interacted with different messaging channels. Then both the context and the engagement solutions, so tools that you have on the solution side, are powered by backends that can be scaled on an ongoing manner, and are tools that enable efficiency through this. And these are things like, hey, how do I prevent over-communicating? So what kind of rules do you create as a system? How do you create and identify rules on what is the most effective campaign on what channel? And then the last piece is the engagement channels that enable the scale and reliability to actually communicate once you have all of this figured out. And the reason why we actually build these as these separate blocks and show this off is we also think about these systems as you can use any of these systems individually. So if you have an engagement use case that is just based on channels and is a transport use case, at Pinpoint, we think about this as you should be able to use as a customer just the engagement channels and be able to just set up a transport system. Else, if you just want to set up Pinpoint for the analytics so that in the future you can scale and grow into the broader context for user engagement and start with analytics, you have that capability to set your systems up for that. So that's how we started thinking about the architecture on this. How does that translate it today? Is in the simple understanding users on the analytics side, Pinpoint provides you with the SDKs on the mobile side as well as web to capture that analytics for users. It also has APIs where you can, on the server side, bring in all the information. On the user engagement service solutions, you have the targeting audience and campaign management and segmentation tools that enable you to identify the right audience. Add preferences, add attributes at the user level, at the destination endpoint level that enables that rich targeting for each user. And the last piece is having the tight coupling between engagement services and then the messaging channels to actually have use cases across direct messaging and targeted messaging, which is campaigns. So you could satisfy both your transactional as well as your targeted marketing use cases using Pinpoint. And then extending that one channel at a time. So you think about, we started with push, now we support SMS, email on the same service, and we can continue to add more onto it. Alon?
So up until last year, last reInvent, a marketer wouldn't have been able to or use the AWS services on their own. They would have had to go to a developer, and a developer would have had to stitch together a solution based on the building blocks that AWS provides to enable a marketer to engage users. And so in 2016, last year, we launched Pinpoint, and we focused first on mobile user engagement. This is where you have a mobile application, and you want to keep that user engaged, because there's a lot of users download an app, use it once or twice, and then after 3 days, they don't use it anymore. So we first focused on that, and we supported mobile push notifications, campaign automation, analytics for the mobile app, and the ability to segment who you target and how you target users. And so instead of a developer having to stitch together a solution that involved mobile analytics, that involved SES for email, that involved SMS and mobile push notifications, we brought all of those capabilities under Pinpoint and provided a solution where a marketer can actually create interactions with their users, can track what the users are doing. We also included this year the ability to include email, SMS, as well as push notifications, and then capture events from more than just mobile applications. We can now capture events from any application. It could be your CRM system, your point of sale system, your e-commerce system. They can all the events on those systems can be captured inside of Pinpoint, and you can target users over all those messaging channels that I mentioned. The other area that we focused on is the ability to look at your user and identify the user across all those channels. So user identity across all the channels. We incorporated also or integrated Cognito, so it can use Pinpoint if you use that service as well. Now Pinpoint is a multi-channel experience. So our goal is to continue to make the AWS building blocks easier and more accessible for marketers, but also for developers to be able to build applications where when they use Pinpoint, instead of just using a channel that's just a pipe, they can use Pinpoint, which will capture the analytics of that channel and give them a lot more insight as to what the users are doing.
So when we started with Pinpoint, right, like as Ilan said, it was all about simplification and focusing on user engagement and messaging as the primary use case when you think about application to end user messaging. And we start thinking about who are the personas. And here's what we heard from customers. We heard from customers that, hey, they want a managed service that can scale reliably. We talked to customers about the developer persona especially was, hey, I want to be able to quickly and be flexible, in a flexible manner, support multiple stakeholders. The questions are, and the feedback, and be able to iterate quickly and have the flexibility to say, hey, my current use case is maybe an analytics use case, but then it expands into adding additional messaging, and how do I tie those together? How do I tie my analytics together? And that's where the being able to support those stakeholders quickly element comes in.
Yeah. So whilst developers could do that, for a marketer, we focused on providing tools that gives them the agility that they need, where they can actually control the interactions and measure what users are doing without having to turn to a developer every time they needed to improve the user experience. And so the tools allow them to define and create the interactions and then measure and improve what those interactions do.
So, Ilan, go ahead.
Yeah. So the tools for the marketer are available through the console. So when you go and use Pinpoint, it'll open up a console for you. And within that console, there are multiple things that a marketer could do. A marketer can look and analyze what users are doing. So campaign performance, looking at messaging utilization, what happens in terms of what's been delivered, what's been opened, what's been clicked, which links have been clicked. They're able to analyze those types of things. They're able to create their segments and import their segments from third-party systems. So you can either start off with an application that you build on our platform and then everything is self-contained, or you're capturing events from your point of sale system, from your CRM systems, et cetera, and you're then going to engage those users. So you can bring those segments in. After you've analyzed and created segments, you are then ready to start figuring out what messages you want to target those users with. And so we're able to capture templates for our users, for our marketers, where they can put all the templates, whether it's a rich email that they're sending out or a short SMS message that they're sending out. They've got all their reusable and parameterizable templates that they can store in Pinpoint. And then finally, once those building blocks are in place, marketers can actually create campaigns. They can either target their entire user base, or they can create A/B testing, where they can take smaller cohorts of users, which the system will automatically do for you, and it'll hold out as many users as you want and test how users react to different types of content impressions. So those capabilities are all now in the hands of marketers, and when marketers use them, they're also using those underlying services that AWS provides.
And how does it look for a developer? I think from a developer persona, I think it was focus was on scale, having a scalable service that can scale for the use cases. But then was the flexibility on having the flexibility to use a service based on the use case that they had at hand and use it across APIs, SDKs, other CLIs, and having the ability to completely automate these engagement scenarios. So could they create an automated set of cohorting which could plug into their database systems and create automated segments so that campaigns can be created based on when real-time scenarios are happening. When an event is happening, can they create campaign triggers for targeted notifications? And then it was all about how does this work with other systems? How does it work with their databases that they already have, with existing campaign management systems? Can it just be plugged into existing systems? And that's where the API layer from a console perspective, like when I talk about existing systems, it will be, I have a management console that my team already uses. How do I then leverage Pinpoint and leverage the automation capabilities that Pinpoint provides, so my marketing team still continues to using the same console? And that's where the APIs become important, because you can completely obfuscate that, hey, the messaging and the campaign management and the segmentation tools can be completely leveraged Pinpoint, but the front-end layer can remain the same for your marketers. And we've now talked all about Pinpoint. We started talking about giving you an overview of the challenges and what is digital engagement. I think for now, the next section would be, Ilan, I want to focus on is, what are our tips? How do we recommend driving effective engagement using Pinpoint? One of the seminal points that we raised was user context, that having a system built for setting up context is important. So in Pinpoint, that user context is captured at two levels. One is endpoints or destinations, which is what is the endpoint or what is the destination you're targeting. And a good example is an app developer who has an iOS and Android app could have the iOS and Android apps are destinations. But the same app developer could have an email address that they captured at login using Cognito, or an SMS number that they know that, hey, this is the number of the phone customer. Today, each of those can be stored as destinations. But what we recommend is, ultimately, the end user experience is driven by, can you map it back to the user? And how do you actually tweak, and how do you capture analytics saying which of these channels are performing better for each user? So we definitely recommend, do not only think about your customers as endpoints or destinations, but think about the users and start building that user map and storing, saying, how do each of these endpoints map to users? Next, on analytics.
Yeah, so with analytics, whenever you use a channel in Pinpoint, it'll capture all the analytics about that channel. So if you are using mobile apps, we have SDKs that will capture any standard event like opening the app, launching the app, to any custom events where you can instrument the app, whatever part of the app someone clicks on or takes an action on, we can capture all those user events. In terms of email, SMS, mobile push, we have analytics across all those channels. So emails will tell you whether the email was delivered, whether it was opened, whether somebody clicked, what link they clicked on. For SMS, we can capture the inbound SMS and what people sent back and responded to with SMS messages that were sent. So all the things within Pinpoint, we capture in a common analytics system so that everything in Pinpoint, you have a 360-degree view on what the users are doing. However, we also made the analytics system extensible and interoperable. So you will have other applications, or you may or may not, but if you have other applications, your developers can have those applications send user events into the Pinpoint analytics system. And then once those analytics are in Pinpoint, we also recognize that a lot of our users have third-party analytics systems that they'd like the Pinpoint events to go into. And so we've also provided, through Kinesis, the ability to take anything that goes into Pinpoint and put it into any other data warehouse that you need to use in your organization. So interoperable, it's extensible, and everything in Pinpoint is already captured by the analytics system. In addition to the infrastructure, the back end of the analytics system, we also provide tools for users to have visualization on what the analytics is capturing. So there are some standard things like you can look at campaign effectiveness, how people are responding to your campaigns so that you can then tweak your engagements, to all the way to what users are doing. You know, whether users are logging in or how active they are with your messaging and with your application. We have all of those captured and displayed for you within the console.
So Ilan talked about getting the data out. Why is that getting the data out? Like, so you can capture all of the data coming real time into Pinpoint, but then also have the flexibility via Kinesis Firehose to actually get the data out into your own data store. This also helps for using Pinpoint, the analytics capabilities on Pinpoint for operational metrics. So if you have an application and you want to capture operational metrics, you could have a pattern that says Pinpoint, Kinesis, front of the Lambda, and then CloudWatch, so you can alarm on operational performance for your applications. You could also use the same paradigm to actually set up real-time engagement scenarios where you could have, as events are happening in an app, as customers are interacting with an application, you could have the same construct because it's a stream, that stream can then listen into events and a Lambda can then be acted on to actually call, again, a campaign action or a send message action on that. It also enables you to use the import functionality from the analytics. So you've now created all the analytics, you have the store to get all the data in real time to a data processing store. You can now bring the data back into the segmentation side of things so that you can target customers.
Great. And on segmentation, we also took a similar approach as we did for analytics. If you're running your applications completely on Pinpoint using the Amazon stack, then everything is self-contained and you can derive your segments from the analytics system itself. However, many of our customers have third-party or they have other applications as well, like CRM applications, e-commerce applications, and point-of-sale applications. So when you're capturing data about users from there, you can bring those into Pinpoint as well. A marketer can do it through uploading files, and then a developer can automate that when they basically capture files, put them onto S3, and then Pinpoint will use those for segmentation. So with regards to segmentation, we're making that as interoperable as we can so that you can use segments of users from any application that you have within Pinpoint that then targets those users with various messaging protocols and campaign automation that we have.
So if you look at the next slide, this slide talks about exactly what Ilan was talking about. Is the left-hand side is the console experience for creating dynamic segments. You can have a filter based on select a channel, based on the attributes that you've defined either on the endpoint level or on the user level. You can then define different filters and dynamic segment attributes that you in the console can create. Or you can automate on the right-hand side is the S3 import job. You can actually create and bring in your endpoints via S3, where you could have a cohort of users based on any input database that you could have externally or within AWS. You run a query, export the job out into S3, and then import that job into Pinpoint as the segment, as a static segment to target users. Last is once you have all of this, so now you've had the set up user context, you've thought about analytics, you've figured out how to target and segment users on that analytics. Next is figuring out what is the right channel, right? You have a bunch of channels that Pinpoint provides today on email, SMS, and push notifications. You have the breadth in terms of on push notifications, you have support for APNS, GCM, Baidu, and ADM. You have on SMS, you can actually create user scenarios for flexible routing based on to ensure deliverability and cost, as well as scenarios like two-way messaging. So you have an order confirmation alert that you sent out saying, here's your order confirmation alert. And if you want to have a two-way messaging back saying, what is the input or what is a message saying help? Or you have context on send me an alert when, or a good example could be a SMS-based ordering mechanism where you could say, what is the order you want to place? Do you want to place an order for item A, B, and C? And the two-way messaging could enable, if you respond back saying item A, that will be captured via the two-way messaging and saying, this is the user that's enabled this use case. And email continues to say, you have all the deliverability that we ensure as a platform, and then you have functionality to measure effectiveness based on opens and clicks that you capture on that. We will talk about channel extensions in a bit. Definitely want to talk about the campaign management side of this.
Yep. So within Pinpoint, campaigns are basically when you combine user segments, content that you want to target to those users, and when you want to target those users. And then the campaign management within Pinpoint does all the automation and sending the messages and capturing all the events and the outcomes of those messages. Within Pinpoint also, we enable users and marketers to do campaign holdouts. So they don't have to target their entire audience in a campaign. They can test the different impressions of content that they may want to send, and then let Pinpoint select the users that are engaged, and then see what the effectiveness and results are, and then grow the cohort of users that way. So we support A/B testing as well. So there are tools for the marketer to be able to do all of that across all the channels, email, SMS, push, and then you'll also be able to, as Georgie mentioned, plug in and extend Pinpoint with your own channels.
So the next comes transactional messaging or direct messaging. We call it direct messaging, and the reason why we stress on both of this is a lot of times we started off with targeted messaging, and very soon we realized that messaging as such is not always targeted, but it's also the direct scenarios that you want to enable. But what is foremost is you should still have context on how many messages overall are you sending to customers, and how do they span across your marketing side of things or your engagement side of things, which is targeted, to your direct transactional side of things, and have one system of record to do that. So you can do that in the console. The easiest way to get started and using Pinpoint is come use Pinpoint for the direct messaging functionality. Hey, I want to send an SMS to a user. I have a phone number. I want to send a transactional notification. How do I send that? In the console, you have the capability to do that. Or you can use the APIs to send messages directly, where you could have one message call that says, hey, send message to this endpoint, and this is the message type. Or you could have the functionality called as send user messages, where as you guys started off with, if you have a context for what was the user that you have, saying Georgie, you could have Georgie has 3 channels, and you'd say send Georgie a message on an SMS channel, and you could just say send user messages to Georgie and just have the SMS message defined. It just helps with not having to translate, saying what are the endpoints that map to each user. So that's one of the simplification that we've done is we've abstracted saying you don't have to maintain what are most systems have user context of a user ID. And the challenge there has to be a separate layer that you have to maintain to say what is a map between a user ID to each destination. And if you can actually this is where we can simplify it, is by allowing that as a managed solution, saying, give us all that context, and just at the point of message sending, tell us what user and what message, and we will translate what the endpoint information is on that user. Cool. We've talked about a lot of functionality that's already on Pinpoint. We just yesterday added support in public beta for Pinpoint Extensions. So this is something new that we are adding, and we did mention on the channel side. What is Pinpoint Extensions? Pinpoint Extensions enables you to extend the campaign management, segmentation, and filtering capabilities that Pinpoint has from the console and the messaging side to add and bring your own channel and do enriched functionality by fronting all of that with an AWS Lambda function. So Pinpoint Extensions works on 2 modes. There's a delivery mode and there's a filter mode for Pinpoint Extensions. On extensions and a delivery mode, you could bring in channels such as if you have an in-product messaging app, or if you're an app that relies on a social media construct or in-app channel, you can actually extend that and say, I want to register endpoints that map to that, identify each of those app channels or app endpoints, and directly message those endpoints. Or on the social media scenario, if you have a Facebook Messenger or a use case to connect with your customers on Facebook, you could actually extend saying, register that as a Pinpoint extension channel, and that's something that we've captured in the docs for this. Pinpoint extension as a filtering mechanism and a mechanism for enriching messaging works in the filter mode, where you can actually define that extension function to sub-filter each of those segments that you've defined. And use cases where you could use the filter mode is if you have data that could be confidential, could be relevant, and data that can be kept only in your systems. At campaign execution, the way you could power it is you could actually say, run this, here's the segment of users, enrich this segment with a particular attribute, and then use that attribute just for that campaign execution instance. So this could be your good use case here is credit score. It's highly confidential data, could be your health records. You could say, all right, here's the information that you can share, and just enrich that information and send messages like, hey, here's your updated score, etc. And this support is now available in public beta, and currently it's available on the API layer, and we plan to extend that within the console functionality as we take this service to production, this feature to production. Cool.
Great. So there are mics if anyone has any questions.
Yep.
Anyone? Otherwise, I think we're good.
Okay, yeah.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.